I think I'm far from being a legend, but what I'm hoping to do today is share with you a lot of practical advice that you can implement as soon as you get back. So I'm not going to talk at all about what I do, yet I do want to give you a quick context about where I got to where I am so you understand my perspective and how I've shaped my thinking around sales development. So this talk is about how VPs and SDR managers can help you 3x your quota. Quick background about my story. In 2011, I had the idea to start a team that would work in the edge of innovation for sales development. And over the next 2 years, I took every possible role in sales development. I was an SDR making 120 calls a day. I became a manager managing 10 reps, had to hire my first few managers to manage a team of up to 27 people. Then I was sourcing and closing my own deals. Later on, working more on the ops side of things, lead routing, tools, data, and managing researchers abroad for low-cost labor, allowing us to scale our operations. And finally, getting back into this motion of sales development innovation, helping companies find what is the next thing that's going to give them an edge over their competition to find the most valuable deals as quickly as possible. So hopefully this experience of mine, and the things I've learned through this journey will help you build some things. So today I have 5 lessons to share, and hopefully if you're not doing some of these yet, you'll consider them, and feel free to ask questions at the end or come talk to me about how you can possibly implement this on your own. The journey of starting a sales development team is quite interesting. Most people are like, okay, my company needs more sales, let's hire some AEs. And then they're like, okay, my AEs don't have enough meetings, let's hire some SDRs. And then the SDRs come in and they find themselves with a million tasks to do. You got to research the personas, define target accounts, set up tools, create the sequences, figure out which sequences are working, which ones are not, set up the meetings, make sure they follow up. When things fall through the cracks in pipeline after the first meeting, they need to come back and re-engage. They need to be learning best practices and don't blast the market, yet do make your 100 calls and 100 emails. And what we feel and what we think the SDRs are doing is something like this, splitting the time equally among the 27 responsibilities that we give them. What might actually be happening is more like they're feeling overwhelmed 70% of the time and maybe working a little bit and trying to figure out how they get a promotion to AE so their life doesn't suck as much anymore. In any case, the best way to actually organize your sales development team is to understand what process you need to go through to go from, I don't yet know who I sell to now I have an engaged account that really would benefit from the product that we have. So, as you can see on the slide, it's define your target accounts, you got to research the contacts, you got to create the sequences, you got to reach out to secure a meeting, make sure that meeting shows up at the scheduled time. Some qualification process happens there. I've written articles about different ways to qualify inbound and outbound. Those are different, so we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. And then it starts the buyer's journey, right? They're effectively evaluating your technology. So, step number 1, define target accounts. One of the things that surprises me is that a lot of people throw things like ICP or TAM, left and right, yet they don't necessarily understand what those mean. And it's very important for every company to define exactly what your ICP is going to be, or what's your theory of who your ICP is right now. You're going to define this by understanding what are the parameters that impact who you sell to. So you might sell to companies that, we have clients that range from 100 employees to 10,000 employees, and we have companies that, range from like X to Y to Z and whatever. You might have different things, or they use certain technologies. Within all those parameters, there might be industries as well and so on. You got to define who are you going to go try to tackle first, most likely by just looking at your current clients. When I was working for Reputation.com, I remember walking in the door, looking at the client list and figuring out that of their top 10 clients, 3 were apartment management companies and 2 were storage companies paying hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then they have a long tail of like 100 other customers paying $20K. And I went to the VP of sales and I said, here's what we should do. We should just focus on those industries. I went to figure out the apartment management association, who was the leadership there. I figured out every apartment management company in the nation, and I just started making 100 dials a day, trying to figure out what is the pain that these companies have and how can we replicate it? And what that created is, by me specializing in this tiny industry that I felt was getting a lot of benefit from the product, even in the conversations that weren't fruitful, I was learning more about why they would or why they wouldn't do this and what they care about. And even when the demos were happening, which we recorded all the demos, I was running my own, but we recorded all the demos and then reanalyzed the data, we would see that the same questions were popping up over and over again. So if you define who you're going after, and you can define who's your ideal customer profile, and you can focus on that segment, it's going to make things much easier. There's another reason why you want to keep a very detailed list of target accounts, yet almost forget about the contacts. And the reason for that is that your company database is evergreen. That means that if we're trying to sell to apartment management companies, it's most likely that 3 years from now, the data that I found about this company today, they have 60 apartments or 60 buildings across the nation, and they have X many employees and X much revenue. It might fluctuate 10% up and down or 20% up and down, but they're still going to be in the same region type of company that we want to sell to. Yet, if you focus solely on contacts, I mean, how many of you are working today in the same company you were working 3 years ago? Very few, right? It's going to be 50, 60, 70% of your data is now old, and you got to almost throw it away or revalidate it, and that takes a lot of time. So something to keep in mind is set up your set of target accounts. Don't worry too much about the contacts right now, and start defining who do you want to reach out to, but don't just collect data for data's sake. Once you have target accounts, remember, accounts are evergreen. That's number one. That's number two, you got to find the personas and their contact info. You got to figure out what's their email address, what's their phone number, and hopefully, if you're really good at outreach, you're going to figure out even more things that you can personalize. Some of these might be specific things that are evergreen. Oh, you're in the beverage industry, and we work with Coca-Cola and Pepsi. So guess what? We're a good fit, right? And it's not like the company's going to get out of the beverage industry overnight. Yet the CMO might change. So some of the things that you're going to do is you got to figure out a process where when you're about to target an account, you have a quick research process where you can find the data that has very short half-life. All your evergreen data is stored in your CRM. They're a beverage company, they're 100 employees, they do X, they're located in this city. Yet, the last LinkedIn post that they shared, or their quarterly earnings, or things like that, are things that are constantly changing. So, what do we recommend? At the beginning, you have your accounts, you have your personas, you've selected your sources, and some sources like LeadIQ or Seamless.ai are here that provide great data. You're going to write a few personalized emails by hand. And you better do a lot of research looking at both evergreen data and non-evergreen data and figure out what email actually feels really well. Once you do 5 or 10 of those emails, and I don't know if Lars Nilsson is here today, but he had a pretty good example of an email I sent him when we talked about it. But you need to define a process to find the additional information. So something I recommend is hire low-cost resources. So Adam was just talking about hiring people on Upwork. You can find people for $4, $5, $6 an hour that will take all that job that the SDR is doing of going into these data sources and extracting the data and give them a defined set of tasks that they got to follow to find your data. So what ends up happening is by collecting data right before the reach out, you can build hyper-personalized emails at scale without spending a lot of time. Some of the emails that I've seen be very successful is, for example, when we're reaching out to university admissions offices trying to sell, let's say, marketing software. Some of those emails said, happy, variable of today, so happy Thursday, first name, right? And then the email said something like, I was just looking at College Board for your admissions data and found out that last year you admitted X percentage of students, and out of those, Y percentage ended up coming to name of the university. And we actually found the short name. So it wasn't University of California, Los Angeles, it was UCLA. First of all, congrats to your new class. Blah, blah, blah. Here's a little bit of a value proposition and pitch. And then at the end, things like go mascot, right? So a lot of that data you can find by just going and researching the university. Their mascot's not going to change. And their admissions percentage might change once a year, but no more often than that. And then when we were about to reach out to that university, we would select target accounts for September. August 15th, we had our team of data researchers go out and scour the web and figure out what are the current people at those companies doing, or what are some skills that they have that are interesting. So for the people who spoke Spanish, at the end we said, P.S., un gran abrazo. Or we would end up with like un gran abrazo. Or like if they had a volunteer organization that they volunteered at, we would say, P.S., how did you start volunteering at? Right? Or if they went to a different university, we would say, how did a university that they attended graduate end up working in admissions at this other university? So by starting to think about your data into evergreen data and data that's like timely, you can reorganize the way you do sales development and be much more personalized at scale. So lesson number 2, focus on EADD. And what I mean by EADD is eliminate, automate, delegate, do. Don't do right now anything you can delegate to somebody else for low-cost labor. Don't try to delegate anything you can automate, and don't automate anything you can eliminate out of your process. And be very conscious about what part of your data will continue to be relevant years from now, and what part of your data is not. And try to collect as much of the data that will be there good forever. That's an invaluable asset, and that will help you personalize better. Step number 3 of this process of sales development is creating the sequences and strategy. The first thing you got to do for that is understand what do the personas care about. You've defined who their titles are. Now you have a process for finding the right contact information 15 days before you actually start reaching out, and all the personalization techniques. But how do you pitch your product, or how do you explain it to the prospect in a way that resonates to them? What I recommend is having the SDR leadership write the sequences, especially if you're hiring very entry-level SDRs. I've heard, seen, and experienced horrible things by letting entry-level SDRs just write things from scratch. And the second problem that you'll have is the ability to understand the performance of these emails when it comes to positive responses and actually yielding something that turns into a positive outcome is much harder if everybody has their own templates. If you have 3, 4, 5 SDRs and they're sending 50, 70, 100 emails a day, it doesn't take too long until you get about 1,000 emails sent out. You might get 2, 3% positive replies. You get about 20 replies. That starts to give you more statistically significant data and understand, is template number 1 working better or template number 2? But if those 3 SDRs are doing their own at 50 emails a day, it takes you a whole month before you have enough data. And you've burned through so many leads across so many SDRs. So by standardizing your sequences and letting your SDR leadership craft them, and this could be your managers or VPs, you can allow your team to collect the data, analyze it, and improve it much faster. I do recommend allowing your senior SDRs kind of like chime in and give ideas for what can be improved, and especially as you write that first template or that first A/B test and you collect the data back, try to get your SDR's opinion on what can be changed or improved. Hopefully your SDRs are spending a lot of time on the phone. So, since they're spending a lot of time on the phone, you should define a call funnel. It's still surprising to me that people doing cold calls don't yet have a very specific way to measure where they're getting stuck and what works or what doesn't. So, unless you have a way to determine where they need the most help, and unless you know how to help them in those areas, there's no feedback loop and there's no improvement. And without improvement, you're going to get stuck again, and your organization's never going to be able to innovate. And I'm going to give you an example of that. And finally is, let just sales ops run all the stats and improve the call and email success. Entry-level SDRs or even senior SDRs, understanding R-squareds and the delta performance between emails and things like that is quite complicated. You can actually use outreach to mark things positive and negative, but allow somebody else to actually run the numbers and figure out at what points do we have statistical significant data to demonstrate that one email is better than the other. Here's a pretty good example of how we do outbound sales development with our SDRs on a phone script. So I've hidden exactly what this phone script is about, but as you can see, I've marked with different colors what part of the script they're at, and every time they connect to a live prospect, they will let us know where they got stuck. We have our own internal statistics to figure out where should they get stuck, what percentage of times, and this allows us in two ways. This enables us in two ways. One is figuring out where this SDR is having the most trouble. It might be the first phrase, right? Hey, John, this is Tito. I'm with X company. Do you have 2 minutes? Does that work or not? What percentage of the time does that work across the team? And why is it not working as well for you? And it might be the tone, or it might be the energy, or it might be that you're taking too long to speak, or you're leaving too long of a pause. Things like that might be influencing your performance. But the second and more interesting data we get is that by writing somewhat specific calling scripts, we can figure out that this person, when we call them, when we say, hey, John, this is Mike with this company, do you have 2 minutes? And they responded negatively. The next time we call, we can alternate the script and say something like, hey, John, I was hoping I caught you for a quick minute. Is it an okay time? And then if that doesn't work, we can say, hey, John, you don't know me. I'm Tito. Do you have 2 minutes to chat? I promise I'll keep it brief, right? And by alternating the script with the same person, we can tap into different personalities that work well or don't work well, right? It is the psychographic profile of the persona you're reaching out to that really matters. Some of the cool things that we've iterated on and gotten really good at is when we're calling VPs of sales and we're like, hey, John, you have 2 minutes? And they're like, no, I'm busy. We say, come on, man, you're a sales guy. I'm a sales guy too. Give me 2 minutes. And they just laugh and respond positively, and most of the time we get it. If you try that with engineers, good luck. They're not going to be happy, right? So by measuring your calls and your scripts and segmenting it into different areas and keeping track of that data, if you have somebody that's really good with numbers, you can figure out what works, what doesn't, and you can innovate further. So data guides your success. Number 4, we went through the first 3 steps of figuring out sales development, and what that will create is it will free up all the time for your SDRs. And no longer do you get to the office and you ask your SDR, what are you doing? And he's like, well, I'm trying to figure out what accounts I'm going to call. And since that is part of their responsibility, you can't tell them really anything. But when you've operationalized the rest of your team for excellence, and everybody has their own tasks, you have your data researchers finding the personalization for the emails. You have leadership defining the accounts. All the emails are written. What's left to do? Making calls. So this is a quick snapshot. As you can see, the dates are still there. This is the past 2 weeks, not counting this one of my team. And this SDR made 1,078 calls that week. That's about 108 per day. Why? They're free. And what does this create? They can get so much better at their job quicker. Because if you make 10 calls a day, or 20 or 30, and you're connecting to 1 or 2 prospects, by the time you have 100 conversations and you figure out what's working and what's not, it's months. When you're making 100 calls a day, you talk to 10 prospects. Every week, we can go listen to those call recordings and say, oh, Terry, here's the problem. You're asking, do you have 2 minutes? And that's not giving you authority. And without authority and credibility, you won't be able to engage with prospects. So you have to say, do you have 2 minutes? Right? And change the tone. And you can get much better at how you iterate your scripts. And it's not going to be the exact same for everybody. Guys and girls sometimes have different ways to speak, the tone of voice, and how you manage those conversations. You get a coach to the individual, but if you're collecting data, you'll get better every day. So practice makes perfect. Free up your SDR's time so they can make hundreds of calls a day, or 100 calls a day, or 80 calls a day. Make it something that's reasonable and that's sustainable. And finally, build an SLA. The most frustrating part of being an SDR is setting up an appointment, it shows up, I still don't get credit, or putting so much effort, like Adam said, I spent so much time trying to get this prospect to show up at the right time, and then it gets disqualified because they weren't interested, right? So something I recommend is use criteria that's completely binary. They either have 500 employees or not, they either use Salesforce or not, and they're either a director level or above title or not. But don't use things like they had pain or they had interest, because that's a sliding scale. How much pain does it qualify a lead to be qualified versus it doesn't, right? And by building an SLA, and we can go, I don't have a ton of time, but the way you qualify outbound with an inbound slightly different. With outbound, you should focus much more on having the right person at the right company. And the right company is defined by a company that has a gap between where they are today and where they need to be. And the only purpose of your cold call is to figure out what that gap is. And if it's big enough that your product can make a difference, your SDRs are driving not interest, but curiosity. You're doing this today. You could be doing this. There's a huge gap in performance there. Wouldn't it be cool to figure out what that would look like? How other companies have been able to do that? So focus on those things. So a good SLA will prevent conflict and make your SDRs happy. And by the end, if you implement all these 5 tips and your SDR team starts working better, this is what your organization will look like. You have executive management defining target accounts. You have a data research team that's inexpensively sourcing the right data, be it evergreen or non-evergreen, right at the right time for your SDRs to reach out. You have executive management creating the sequences and strategy, helping you craft those better emails and understand how those call scripts work, and you just focus your SDRs on reaching out and securing meetings. You let your SLA qualify meetings as good meetings or bad meetings to avoid conflict, and with that, you can have your AEs have much more productive conversations and get your revenue to skyrocket. Thank you so much. Hopefully that was a good presentation, and you took a bunch of notes. Because that's the reason we come to this conference, to learn a lot. So connect with me on LinkedIn. I am Tito Bohrt. And yeah, if you have any questions, I don't know if we have any time, or I should hold them for later.
We can take 1 or 2.
Sure. 1 or 2 questions.
We're good? Yeah, Tito's going to be around all day. You good?
That's good.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Tito.
Thank you, everybody.